And good morning, everybody. Welcome to FSU Coach Live. My name is Tim Baghurst, and I'm joined today by a special guest, Chris Babb. Chris has multiple roles that we're going to talk about today. So, Chris, rather than me try to explain it, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, where you came from, what you're doing now, and what you did along the way?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me, Tim. It's good to visit with you again. But currently, I'm an instructor in the Rogers Department of Communications and the director of the student sports media productions programs at Washita Baptist University, located in Arkadelphia, Arkansas, some of your old stomping ground. But my journey it's kind of a different one. I was a mass communications major at Washita, graduated in 1999. Then came back and was the sports information director for the university from 2001 to 2006. And in those 5 years, I started thinking that athletic administration may be something that I wanted to pursue. In my responsibilities, I had the media relations responsibilities, but also some compliance responsibilities. Then I moved over and worked in the university's development and alumni offices. Worked with some athletic fundraising, but then general university fundraising. And I thought that if I wanted to get into athletic administration, having a little bit of experience in all of those would be helpful. And so 2011, the town we live in is a one school district town. The athletic director that was for the school district decided to retire. I went to one of the school board members, actually was one of my advisors when I was a student at Washita, and I talked to him about that, pursued the job, and was lucky enough to be hired. And so from 2011 to 2018, I was the athletic director for the Arkadelphia Public School District. And then after 7 years, decided that athletic administration, it was rewarding. It was great. I enjoyed it. Decided that I wanted to kind of get back to my communications roots, and then I moved over to be the communications director for the school district for a year, and that's what brings us to today. A year into that job, really enjoyed the job, enjoyed the district. Our students are in. My wife and I have 3 students in the Arkadelphia school district. She's a product of the Arkadelphia school district, had some good experiences here, and so but the job that I currently have now came open. Washita was having a bigger emphasis on the sports media production program for students, which I was a part of it when I was a student at Washita. And it just kind of came full circle. The opportunity presented itself, and I was able to move over. And so now I teach in our communications department, mass communication, journalism, sports media, sports journalism classes, and also head up our student sports media production program. And we have students, I probably have about 25 to 30 students who work with our broadcasting our athletic events on our, whether it's basically the goal is for the students to get experience behind the camera, in front of the camera, producing, directing, all the things that may be involved in sports media production. So that's kind of what brings us to where we are now.
I want to start by looking at your role as an athletic director, and we were talking before the interview started about how it was a non-traditional occurrence, and the response I gave was almost all of us have a non-traditional route to where we are today. Right. Talk a little bit about how you became an athletic director, because it's a little bit unusual in terms of most people. You're a head coach, you've been coaching for X number of years in the school. The job opens and that's where you end up. That didn't happen for you.
It did not. I would say the majority of the athletic directors I worked with in our state had been coaches at some point, risen through the ranks per se. We're a head coach. Sometimes the athletic director role is a way to give one of the coaches an additional amount of money. The majority of the schools had our classification and above had a athletic director. But I was not only non-traditional in that sense, I was non-traditional in that that's how I could get my teaching license. It's a certified position. And so Arkansas allows coaches to get certified non-traditionally. I went through a Master of Arts teaching program and got certified to be my license to be a teacher. And so it was a different route. I think there were some benefits to that. I think there were also areas that being coached in the traditional way would have helped me make some different decisions or better. But I think overall it worked out fine, because I think a lot of it comes down to no matter what job you're in, and the relationships with people and what you know can help you out. And if you can work with people when you get in a job, a lot of the other things kind of fall into place.
How did you deal with the perception of maybe a coach of, well, Chris has never been in my shoes. He doesn't get what I'm doing. He doesn't understand it. Therefore, I shouldn't listen to what he says, or I should rebel, or maybe have that negative attitude, as opposed to Chris is my athletic director. I answer to him. He's in charge. How did you deal with that? Because coaches sometimes have egos and maybe think they know better.
Yeah.
And then there's conflict. So how did you resolve that, or establish this kind of idea of I know what I'm doing, trust me in my job?
Well, I think, to be honest, I had to acknowledge that you probably do know a little bit more in this area than I do when it comes down to some of the aspects of what they were dealing with. Not trying to hide that, acknowledging that my route was different. My first meeting as athletic director, I was hired on August 1st. My first day was August 1st, 2011. School started 2 weeks later. The golf season and the tennis season in Arkansas in the fall, and they start August 1st. So my first day, those fall sports were already completed. So I remember standing in front of a group of coaches for the first time, and some of them just from my living in Arkadelphia for the last 10 years, but I did know some of them. All of them, most of them were older than me. Not only were they older and more experienced in life in general, but definitely in that. So I think it was just a matter of acknowledging that up front. There are going to be some areas where I'm going to have to learn from you, and I think a leader can learn from people who, quote unquote, are under their supervision. But I think it was just being honest and saying there are some things that, you're gonna have more experience with. Let's work together. Ultimately, it's for the student experience. So let's work together on that.
As a high school athletic director, what were some of your main roles and responsibilities? What would you say took up the most time and maybe the most mental effort?
The not so funny answer, I guess, would be cheerleading. But, no,
you're going to have to answer that. What do you mean?
Yeah, well, I think I say running. When people get involved with their students, their children, in their activity, no matter what activity they're in, they take it on a lot of times different than what they are on an everyday basis. I work with people that worked with for years. All of a sudden, it comes to their child activity, and the perception of their child may be wrong or saying people just act differently a lot of times when it comes to their child. I say the cheerleading thing off the joke. That's kind of a tough issue a lot of times with cheerleading tryouts that end up why did her daughter not be this things that this nature. But dealing with people on a day-to-day basis, probably one of the things that I think a lot of people don't think about is the safety aspect. Making sure that your venues, your travel, your coaches are properly certified. The safety aspect, especially now. Arkansas High School Athletic Administrators Association had an online seminar this week, and I think a lot of what they were talking about. I still have some friends in the work schools, and I think a lot of what they were talking about was how do we start back this fall? Whatever it looks like, whenever it happens, how does that happen? And safety has always played a big factor, because you want to make sure that you're covering the areas that go as far as safety and security, as far as venues and crowds. But especially now, that's a lot of people. I guess a lot of people won't be aware of now. It's something that athletic directors look at for a long time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, safety is a big issue, and I think maybe some issues sleeping at night, knowing that if there is a problem, it's going to come down to you and you may have to answer for it.
Yes. And I think I thought a lot about how many bus trips take on a daily basis through whatever sport season. You've got teams traveling. Who knows how many times just for one school. But think of Friday night, Tuesday night, basketball, Friday night football. I guess football probably has the most good cheerleaders, actual team on the road every Friday, and how few times you hear of incidents. There are a lot of things. If something were to go wrong, who's going to follow your lead? Have you done what you know to do to take care of the safety of the needs before the contest?
When you look at your role as an athletic director, did you have to, I'm assuming you went through some hiring processes. Did you have to go through some firing processes as well? And if I look at either of those, how do you navigate those to get the best people and then make sure that, letting somebody go is I'm not going to say an easy process, but a smooth process?
Well, I think one of the misnomers when people think of athletic directors, I think a lot of people fall into the college mode, where the college athletic director has a coach of whatever sport that's not coming up to standards, and they were getting rid of it. In our situation, coach education, it's different because a coach is hired in Arkansas. I know it's different in different states, but in Arkansas, a coach is hired as a teacher, and you get a coaching stipend. So it's more important to find someone that you've got to be able to work with the principals to find somebody who's going to fill both of those roles. They have to be able to fill their role in the classroom for the principal, for them to be satisfied, but they also have to be able to fill their role as a coach. You can't, in our situation, we couldn't, if we had someone who was not being a good coach, you can't just say, all right, you're not going to coach anymore because teacher fair dismissal and things like that. They are hired as a teacher. And so there are different things that have to be done there. So it is a more difficult, in our situation, it is a more difficult process for that in the high school realm where we were and where we were with regards to firing or releasing, letting people go. But the hiring part of it is an inexact science. It's obvious. You hear kids say, well, I didn't get the interview because I didn't know anybody. And it does help. And it does help to know somebody in a place where you get a great interview. Now, you also have to know your stuff. You have to be competent in the job. I don't care if you're not competent in the job, then you're not, it's going to show out. It's going to show in the process. But it does help to know people. It helps to build relationships. If you're a college student wanting to get into coaching, and if you're in a location, obviously, if you're at a college and you're on campus, some of those areas are going to have local school districts. See what the state association rules are for allowing help. In Arkansas, we can have volunteer coaches in the school district, and so you have to be age 22. But once you get that age, if you want to build relationships, go see you can help out. Go volunteer with the local district and see if there are ways that you can get your name out there. Not only can you build a relationship with a head coach or an assistant coach and athletic director, you can also show what you can do. And so then if you have both of those areas, it does help you in the process. Hiring is an exact science. It's very hard to get to know somebody in a short interview. So you've got to be able to have. One thing I told my son, he's a ninth grader, I said, always remember that whatever you're doing, you're auditioning or interviewing for the next thing. As you have a coach, most likely the first job you get out of college is not going to be what you want to be doing for a career or where you'll be in the next few years. But use that job as an audition, because you never know who's watching you, especially in coaching. You have the ability to show your ability to future employers, whether it's teams that you're playing against or things like that. So always help yourself out, because so when you get to that hiring process or looking for another job, you've done the things that you don't have to just rely on someone looking at a resume or watching you for 30 minutes.
What are some of the challenges you experienced as an AD? You talked about the safety being something that really concerns you. Hiring can be difficult because you're hiring a teacher/coach. The what else? Because you're not an athletic director now,
No.
and you made that decision to not do it. And so, what were some of the things that helped you make that decision where you decided, you know what, this isn't necessarily best for me or my family?
One of them was family. There are a lot of hours. I don't think people who have not been in coaching truly know how much coaching, how many hours coaches put into it. For a fall sport coach, you have the fall sport season, and in our situation in high schools, they'll have a second sport, which is either a winter or a spring sport. For the athletic director, there's no off season. It goes. I mentioned August 1st was the first playing date for golf and tennis in Arkansas. Back when I started in 2011, but also it goes until the middle of May, and you have a responsibility to try to make sure that you're present, not just at the big events, but at any event. I do think that students notice when their administrators are watching them play. They notice when they're not there also. They notice what events they go to, and that, whether you want it to or not, that dictates the value of the activities that you attend to the students. If you don't show up at their events, I'm not saying every one of them, but be present and be there. So that does take a toll on a person over the course of a year. And for me, it was over the course of 7 years. It also take a toll on your family. I think in coaching, and this is also now in my role as sports media, I tell my students this, but I think media and coaching have a lot of similarities in this area. When you get into coaching and you get into media as well, there are 3 areas. I heard this from Mike Neighbors. He's the women's basketball coach at the University of Arkansas. He spoke to my sports journalism class this last spring. I had a lot of remote speakers, and I'd heard it before, but he reinforced it for coaches. You got to be prepared to give sacrifice in one of 3 areas, either geographic location, finances, or family. The geography, your first job, may not be where you want to be. You may have to move a long way from home, whether that's if you want to get into college coaching, maybe not necessarily high school coaching, but you may have to move away from family. You may have to take a pay cut at some point. I remember distinctly when I got a promotion probably about 15 years ago. I got a raise in a job, and I remember walking out of that so naively thinking I will never make below X amount of dollars again. 5 years later, the Lord slapped me in the face and said, well, here you go. Shows how much you knew. But I've done that twice, 2 or 3 times, because you may have to do that in order to get where you want in a career. And you also may have to make some sacrifices in family. Coaching is not an 8-to-5 job. I would also encourage any student who's watching this who wants to go into coaching. If you're thinking about a family, make sure that if you have a relationship with a significant other that you think is getting to the point where you want to make a commitment, you need to make sure that they understand the job that you're getting into is not an 8-to-5 job. That goes for media as well. So those correlate, kind of in both of my worlds. But you've got to make sure that if you want to do this, knowing up front that coaching is not an 8-to-5 job. You are working with at the junior high and high school level, the public school level. You're working with kids from the 6th or 7th through 12th grades in some situations, and they don't work 8-to-5 either. They may have things that come up. You'll work with kids who have great home situations and less than desired home situations, and those don't operate on a clock either. And if you have a student who calls you at 9 o'clock saying, I need some help with whatever, they have an issue, you may have to leave your house and go help. So I would say those 3 things: be ready for to potentially make a sacrifice in one of those 3 areas or more than one. But also, if you want to get into that and you have a significant other, make sure that they know what they're getting into as well, because it does affect the whole family.
Yeah. I think a lot of people who work in sports, it's one of those commitments that you have to make. If you're just joining us, we're talking to Chris Babb. He's a former athletic director in a high school and currently director of student sports media productions at Ouachita Baptist University. Chris, one of the interesting things I'm passionate about is evaluating coaches and being able to identify areas of strengths and areas of improvement. How did you, as an athletic director, evaluate a season or evaluate a coach during or at the end of that season?
Probably, if hindsight, if I was still in the job, I'd probably give you a different answer. But hindsight, I'd probably say very poorly. That was not one of my strengths. I am by nature, and this is probably what led to some of my job change. By nature, even in the journalism world, I've always leaned towards the PR side of things. One of my strengths that I brought to that athletic director position in my specific instance was some social media and some writing and things like that, which that was a little bit different than the normal thing. But that was not one of my strong points. I fully acknowledge that, but you do have to do evaluations and still maintain relationships. I'm a PR relationship guy, and a lot of times those two things don't go along very well when you're doing evaluations. I do think that when you're dealing with high school, people in the stands, in the crowd, or whatever, oftentimes get hung up on wins and losses. In my opinion, way too much. Now, on that said, we won. Our football team won 2 state championships. Our baseball team won 2 state championships. We had wrestlers win individual state championships. We had a diver win two or three divers win state championships, and those are a whole lot of fun. And so nobody is saying that winning is not important, but I do think, especially in high school, when I'm evaluating as an athletic director, I was evaluating a coach differently than someone who's sitting in the stands may be, because it is a bigger picture than just the state championships or the lack of. I do think that the relationships a coach has with a player are very important, because you have to be able to help children. I mean, that's we're dealing with 13 through 18-year-old. Some of their situations have dictated that they grow up faster than they need to, but you're still dealing with teenagers. And so helping a student become a better person from the 7th grade through the 12th grade is ultimately the goal. That was one of my most favorite things, is going to graduation and seeing the student. When I started out, I had 6th grade PE for a couple of years, and we had another coach and I would have about 70 kids in 6th grade PE. And then to be able to see that first class of 6th graders graduate as 12th graders and see the strides that most of them had made over that course of 7 years was just fantastic to be able to see. That's one thing that I missed when I left the athletic director position and went to communications director. And I think now I'm getting that in a different way with college students, to be able to see them grow from freshmen to seniors. But being able to see that was important in the evaluation of coaches on my end. But there were probably my evaluating of coaches is I'm probably not the expert that anybody's going to want to look. I say that you do have to have the end of the season. You say, are you handling, are you helping students grow on the court and off the court and things like that? And there were some checklists and things that we would talk about and try to improve on. But I think our evaluation as athletic administrators is different than the evaluations of the people sitting in the stands.
Last question before we move on to what you're doing now. Within being an athletic director, you come across a lot of decision making. You have to make a lot of decisions. Right. Some of them are easy, some of them are more complex. And one of the things that I think coaches and anyone in sports needs to understand is ethics and decision making, mm-hmm. and ensuring that when you make a decision, you make one in the right process, as opposed to what you feel at the moment or what's going to be the best interests of one person, et cetera. Without disclosing information you shouldn't, can you give an example of an ethical situation that you had to deal with as an athletic director that you struggled with?
Yeah, I think there are many decisions, whether they're ethical or otherwise, that you're going to know whether you made the right decision or not. Some of those are tougher than others, but I think at the end of the day, you're working as an athletic director at college or high school. You're working with students, and you've got to set an example. And there are instances. I'm trying to think of specific ones without being specific, but there are decisions you have to make on a daily basis as to even things, that ethical decisions that people would never think of. Am I going to allow this sport to do X if I've just told another sport that they can't. Those type things that nobody may ever know about. They're not all just big decisions. A coach comes and asks me, hey, can we do this? I say no, but another coach comes and says, hey, can we do this? And it'd be very easy to make, well, you're a higher profile sport, so yeah, let me go ahead and let you do that. At the end of the day, you got to be able to live with yourself. And do what's right and fair for all groups that you're over.
You have this background in sport media, and you've done a variety of different roles within sport media. Talk a little bit about how sports teams, sports organizations, coaches, athletic directors, everybody in sports can leverage sport media to their benefit. Because from my experience, I think a lot of sports professionals don't do that very well. Either they don't use it at all, or poorly, or they don't portray themselves in the right way that is professional and engages people.
Right. I think when I started as a sports information director in 2001, the internet was here but not fully utilized. Social media was non-existent. I was working at a division. I'm still at Ouachita Baptist University, Division II university in the NCAA. At that point, we relied on the state, the newspaper in Little Rock, hour away from us. It's pretty much a statewide newspaper. To get our message out, we relied on the Arkansas Democrat Gazette to try to get word out, and things like that. And that's really, we relied on a media outlet to get our word out, our name and our story out. And so it was a constant battle for a smaller university to fight for airtime, ink, coverage with in a statewide newspaper where you've lived in Arkansas, that the focus is the Arkansas Razorbacks and things like that. So it was tough.
It should be, as a graduate, by the way. I'm just woo pig suey.
Really. Speaking of graduates, I must say that your football stadium in Tallahassee is named after a Ouachita graduate. Doak Campbell graduated from Ouachita in 1911. So yes, so you can thank Ouachita for the impact in athletics that the former president at Florida State University had. Just a side note there.
Sports information director should know these things, right?
That's right. But with all of the technology that is available now, I tell our students now, technology has helped smaller universities more so than almost anybody, because it helps get the word. You have a tool to help get your message out. It's helped larger universities because now they can control the message. They can potentially lock the media out of their worlds, because at Florida State's level, you think of LSU during their national championship football run. We use their example, their students, or their football department as an example. All the videos that they put out by themselves, their hype videos and all that stuff, that took on a world of its own. And they don't have to rely on media anymore. Now, I still think there is value in both of those, in the relationship between a college athletic department and the media. They still do need some, but for the larger universities, they could lock media out of whether it's practices or things like that. The smaller universities, like a Division II, the technology, the ability for us to live stream, for my students to live stream our events, for the parents who don't live close to be able to watch online for free. So technology has really helped, and I think coaches can really help. It helps in recruiting. When I was a sports information director, the media guide wars were big. Now media guides are limited, but at a point, when you talk about a media guide, that was the recruiting tool for a program. It got so big that it became an arms race, just like anything else has. The NCAA had to put limits on how big a media guide was. And here at Division II level, with one sports information director for 14 or 15 sports, I was trying to get one out by the beginning of the season. When you have larger departments, they're putting 300-page ones out with it. They're using as recruiting guides. So technology has helped, and I think coaches can take advantage of that. There's some great examples of how coaches use technology to try to reach students, high school students that they're recruiting. And I think it's a great way for, if they use it correctly, if they find people in athletic communications at their universities. The athletic communications world has also changed drastically over the last 10 to 15 years. You have to have almost a completely different skill set now. Well, I guess an added skill set. You've always got to be able to write. It always comes down to writing, the ability to tell stories, and a lot of times through writing. But you've got to be proficient in video and things like that. Just like what you're doing. I mean, we were talking beforehand, and you're like, I'm trying to figure this out, but it can get overwhelming.
Yeah.
But if coaches can find a couple of things that they can excel at, they can help their programs out.
And I think I would add as well, they need to be intentional about doing it.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see sometimes where a coach will start in social media, and then they get busy, the season gets going, and then it tapers off, and they kind of lose the traction that they have. And I definitely see it as an opportunity to recruit, without specifically recruiting, just being visible. One of the things that you may have to deal with in sport media is you mentioned a lot of live streaming, and a lot of things can happen during a live stream that you can't control. How do you balance we're going to do this interview versus, well, we can't do this. We may not want to do this interview because X, Y, and Z may say something inappropriate on our stream and kind of damage the reputation that we have as a school.
Right.
As an example, one of my guests swore on the live interview a few days ago, and it was just like, oh no, how do I deal with this? Right.
Yeah.
And fortunately for me, I was able to take it off, cut out the choice word and put it back up.
Right.
How do you deal with that as a sports information director? I'm just representing a small program,
right?
And don't have massive amounts of people watching live. You may, and it may be a situation where you're streaming a major game and somebody does something inappropriate or says something over the mic that you can't control. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with that? What happens?
Well, one aspect, it came up last year, actually 2 years ago, when I was communications director for our local school district. High schools trying to figure out what's the balance in, do we live stream our events for family and things to see and not cutting down on those attending home games. And there was one school district who said their superintendent would not let them do any live streaming because they were afraid of what would be heard over the crowd microphones, and things like that. But when you're talking about specific interviews and you're talking about college students or things like that, I think a lot of that comes with the education beforehand. I know in the sports information director world, the media relations world, athletic communications, especially at the Division I level, media training is where it used to be, this would be nice. Now it's absolutely a necessity, because there are so many things. And not only the media training that I would have done, as far as now, when you're in front of a camera, don't say anything that's going to help the opponent. Obviously you're not going to cuss, be representative of what your coaches talk about and those things. But now it's media training on their own, because as you know, students have their TikTok, their Instagram, the things like that. They are representatives of their university, even when they're off campus. And so that part of media training has taken on a life of its own. It may not be fair, but an athlete at a university is going to be held to a different standard. They're going to be things that they do on social media that the communications major does on social media are going to be scrutinized more so than that communications major. But I think at some point it's a matter of you having the discernment on who you're going to bring on for that interview, and talking to them beforehand and say, hey, we are live. If it's in the heat of the moment, an interview after a game, we do a lot of interviews with players after games. And all that education has to come beforehand about, just remember, when you have a microphone in your face, you're not with your buddies. You're not, talking like normal, like you might informally, you've got to always be aware that if you tell them grandma's watching, they're probably not going to say some of those things as well. So,
yeah, I knew I forgot something before we started this show, Chris.
Forgot
to warn you about that.
Yeah.
Looking kind of across your career, whether it be an athletic director, whether it be in sports communications, what advice do you have for people who may be coming up in sports, who may be, in college and looking at, maybe one day I want to be a coach, or maybe one day I want to work in sports administration? From all the people you've worked with, et cetera, what advice would you give them?
For a student who wants to potentially look at getting into
any kind of sports role.
For one who wants to get into high school coaching, I would say just start with high school coaching. I'd say you've got to try to find certifications in various areas to make yourself more marketable. The health PE jobs are limited. The majority of coaches that go into that coaching track are getting a health and PE certification. The health and PE jobs that are out there are limited. So the more areas of certification you can get makes yourself more marketable. Now, my experiences in the state of Arkansas, I know other states are similar. I know some states allow what they call walk-on coaches that you don't even have to be an employee of the school district. The majority of coaches in our state, in Arkansas, are employed by the district. Our association does allow some volunteers, but there are some limitations on those. But for the traditional student who wants to go into coaching, find more ways to find more areas of certification to help yourself be more marketable. I'd also say just go work somewhere. Go do it. This is also as a college student, whether you're wanting to go into coaching or you're wanting to go into sports media, there are all kinds of areas. Now, obviously not this summer, but hopefully next summer. Every summer in the past, there are camps. If you're wanting to go into coaching, go find a college or go find a high school. Say, hey, can I help you with your camp? If you're in sports media, go back home, find a job with your local media outlet, or say, hey, is there anything that you can do to show initiative and show that you realize that you're going to have to work. You may not, get the big bucks right off the bat, but show initiative and build relationships with people. Show your competency as you're building those relationships so those can work hand in hand as you go into the job market.
And, looking across your career, there's definitely been some changes, right? You've transitioned. We're not in a world where somebody goes into a job and stays there for 40 years and then retires. There's that, we got to make a decision here. Do you have any advice about making those decisions on whether to leave a position or move up, or in your case, as you talked about, sometimes moving down, recognizing that you're moving up in other areas? How do you navigate or make those decisions?
Yeah, I think a lot of times don't rush into them. One of my good friends was Coach Jared. He just took another job, and he got some advice from a coach who had a long-time coach who actually just left his job. He'd been very successful at. He said, how did you decide not to leave this job but then to leave a couple of years later? He said, one of the things that this veteran coach told him was that you've got to decide if you're ready for a new set of problems. Each job you have is going to have problems. I mean, the grass may look greener on the other side, but there may just be more fertilizer. I mean, your perspective at where you are can affect a lot of that. So if you're ready for a new set of problems, if you're tired of the problems that you have at this job, it sounds kind of depressing when you think about it, but nothing is always rosy anywhere you go. There are always going to be issues because we're dealing with people and we're dealing with jobs. And so don't rush into things. If you're ready for a new set of problems, then, or tired of the ones you have, know that you're going to get into some. Being a person of faith, I think prayer has a lot to do with that. You've got to discuss it and make sure that your family is if you have a family, that they're on board as well, and things like that. But I would say just don't rush into anything and don't let emotion make a decision for you. For me, it came after about a year and a half of at the athletic director position, not it came after thinking about it for a year and a half, not a year and a half into it, but it was about 6 years into it. He was like, do I want to do this for the rest of my life? And started having conversations, and then little things came up. There, just out of the blue conversations with. I remember a father who had been a coach, and we were at a baseball game at a place down the road, and we just started talking about something. And he was talking about, I always wanted to do this, but I just decided for my family that it was best that I did that. And I said, why did you say that? He said, what are you talking about? I said, I've been thinking about these things, and just conversations that things started lining up, and it was nothing you just rush into. I think if you rush into decisions about changes and things like that, you could end up regretting. But take your time and then think of don't go to something because you think it's going to be a perfect situation, because rarely is it that situation appeared to be.
Well, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us today. If somebody wants to reach out, has some questions, maybe wants to follow up with you, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, a couple of ways. My email is babbc, just last name, first initial @obu.edu. I'm also Chris_Babb on Twitter. Follow me. We can communicate there as well. But yeah, glad to help out. Anyway, there've been lots of people who poured into me. This journey of mine has kind of come full circle, because I remember it was 20 years ago to the day when I was a senior at Ouachita Baptist University and sat across the desk from my advisor, and he said, "What do you want to do when you grow up?" I was like, "Well, I'll maybe be a professor." He said, "No, I don't plan on that." He said, "Go do some things, work in the field. 20 years later, then you can, if something comes up, then you can impart the things that you've learned into students." And sure enough, it was 20 years to the month where I was offered the current job I have now. So it's kind of come full circle. I'm in the same department, working with some of the same people, and kind of hopefully pouring into the students that we work with. I met with some of them yesterday, and I'm meeting with some of our students Sunday night, the 31st, to start planning for the fall and what we think could happen in the fall, and getting ready. So it's been kind of full circle for me, and I'm happy to be in the position I'm in. I thank you for having me on. It's been great.
Thanks again. Just a reminder as well, we've got one more interview coming up today. Chris, I know you talked about, on Twitter being shared in the same conversation as Charlie Ward. Yeah. Charlie's joining me this afternoon at 2:30 p.m. EST. He's a Heisman winner, and then left his college career at Florida State to go into the NBA, and competed in the NBA for many years before returning to Florida as a head basketball coach at Florida High. So we'll be talking to him about, I don't know where to start. And so really, I look forward to seeing what questions fans come up with and so on.
Yeah, he will probably have a little bit more feedback than an interview like this one will. But no, I was explaining to my kids. I said, yeah, he's gonna have me on in the morning, then a Heisman Trophy Award winner in the afternoon. And it's just kind of similar. And Dad's my son. He said, wait a minute, he was a Heisman Trophy Award winner and he played for the Knicks too. I was like, yeah, not a bad gig. So yeah, I remember being a teenager around the same time when Charlie was at Florida State during the heyday. So.
Well, we hope you all join us for that. But on behalf of myself, Tim Backhurst, and Chris Babb, thank you so much for watching.